Okay, so maybe I was a little hasty last night in declaring a shutdown deal was in the works as those reports started coming out. Yes, apparently Senators McConnell and Schumer did get together and agree to hold votes on two dueling plans, but so far all signs point to no. They don't have enough people on board with either plan to get anything through. So we may be back to square one. All sides are carrying on as though the others don't exist, and we're a day closer to yet another missed paycheck for 1 million plus federal workers and contractors. Closer to home, it was Governor Charlie Baker's biggest campaign promise when he ran for office in 2014.
I say this directly to the voters of the Commonwealth. I am not going to raise your taxes.
But in 2017, facing growing Medicaid costs, Baker did just that for some, with a new fee for employers that didn't provide adequate health care for their workers. Then last June, he signed off on an $800 million increase in payroll taxes as part of the sweeping grand bargain on family and medical leave, prompting questions from many, including me, about his no new taxes pledge. Isn't it fair to say you have raised taxes significantly, and you will raise taxes when you think it's appropriate?
Well, first of all, with respect to the grand bargain, it's an $800 million increase to support that new benefit, yeah. But we inherited a big deficit. Everybody told us we were going to have to raise taxes to pay for it. We didn't.
Kind of seems like they did, though, doesn't it? And then after he was reelected in December, Baker signed into law a new tax on Airbnb and other short-term rentals, and then joined 8 other eastern states in pledging to develop a regional carbon cap and investment program, something commonly referred to as a carbon tax, which I asked the governor about when he joined us on Boston Public Radio just last week. How do you justify that within your historic position that we should not be raising new revenues? How does that fit within that?
Everybody pulls the revenue button to do everything. And most of the time, they're pulling it to spend money on stuff we're already doing. I'm not a big believer. We should live within our means to make the stuff that we currently do work.
And the very next day, Baker pulled the revenue button again, proposing a new 50% tax hike on real estate transfers to help fight climate change. And in his new budget proposal filed today, the governor is proposing a 15% tax on opioid manufacturers and an expansion of the cigarette excise tax to include vaping devices and e-cigarettes. So is it finally time to declare the no new taxes, no new fees campaign promise over? And if it is, should there be celebration or condemnation? Joining me are Shirley Leung, a GBH contributor and interim editorial page editor at the Boston Globe. Hey, Shirley, how are you? Charlie Chippio, senior fellow at the Pioneer Institute, former policy director for Governor Romney. It's good to see you, too. Let's start with what I think we can agree on, so we're on the same page. He has either initiated or signed on other people's initiatives, which have caused him to say yes to huge tax increases. That is an accurate statement, is it not?
Yeah, I don't know if they're huge, but certainly yes.
Well, here they are. Yeah. By the way, let's just take a look. Employer health care fee, $300 million. Mm-hmm. Payroll tax increase, $800 million. Short-term rental tax, $34. We don't know how much the carbon tax thing is. Real estate transfer tax, $137 million a year. And the two that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's over $1 billion a year for a guy who said he was not going to raise taxes. You used to write about what you called, when you were a columnist in your former life, cautious Charlie. Wasn't bold enough, wasn't using his political capital. He is, isn't he?
Yeah, on Saturday morning when I read the paper, I nearly choked on my coffee. I was like, what happened to cautious Charlie? Mm-hmm. He's disappeared. You forgot to add, earlier in the week, he got behind sports betting.
Oh,
right?
That's right, yeah. Well, some people, even I say that may not be a tax, but in any case, these other things are.
But, you know, remember he flagged this actually in the fall. I mean, a lot of this stuff has to do with climate change and fighting climate change, both the real estate transfer tax and also the carbon tax. A lot of that money will go to, you know, dealing with rising sea levels. Another way is to fund public transit to kind of lower our carbon impact. And so, and he flagged that during the campaign. Remember, not the debate that you had, but in one of the debates, he says, he was asked, you know, what will be your legacy in your second term? And he said, fighting climate change. And we're beginning to see the groundwork for that.
Even if all these are good causes, and I think it would be hard to argue that they're not the recipients of these funds, do voters have a right to feel that they were disrespected or deceived? Or
you know, I don't know. I'm sure some voters will. You know, to me, the bottom line, no pun intended here, is that you know, over the time that Governor Baker's been in office, we have gotten to a point now where we have a budget that is structurally balanced, that in this case is only relying on $100 million in one-time funding, which is a huge difference from what had been going on for a long time.
Started putting more money back in the rainy day fund.
So look, my own view is I don't want to get too hung up on every individual detail. I think that this administration has managed our finances pretty responsibly.
So why doesn't Baker just, I mean, as we know, it's the most popular governor in America. He's got huge political capital. Why doesn't he just say, instead of dancing around as he has in those other bites, why doesn't he just say, yeah, I decided after being here 4 years, there are a variety of things that really matter to me and my constituents, and if we have to raise taxes to fund those things, so be it. Why doesn't he just do that?
I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm less concerned about what he says than in what he's doing, and what I'm seeing in the beginning of the second term is that he is starting to have some willingness to spend some of that political capital, and not just for taxes, but hopefully for some other things as well.
Well, except it would seem to me you're Mr. Transportation in my book. I mean, you write about it, you talk about it, you know a huge amount about it. We talked to him about this on Thursday on the radio too. One of the areas where he says whatever he's committed already, that $8 billion over 5 years or whatever it is, he's not talking about new revenues, which virtually every transportation advocate has said is necessary. So while this whole list, climate change, et cetera, will be, if he's successful, the recipient of new tax revenues, transportation will not. Can he get away with that?
Well, I would say
I don't mean get away with it politically.
No, I would say two things about that. The more I dig into the T, the more there is there in terms of just how much money is just thrown on the floor at the T. I mean, it really is unbelievable.
Enough to pay for what needs to be done if it was spurted out?
Yeah, I do think so. And how much is just, now they're finally actually getting the money out the door in terms of the capital maintenance kind of stuff. On the highway side, I think we're seeing him move more toward a willingness to embrace tolling, which I think is really what needs to happen on the highway side.
You know, the other thing, we all know the millionaire's tax, which I don't think Baker ever took a position on, even though I think he was leaning no.
You probably could guess how he's going to vote.
Maybe. Well, the Supreme Judicial Court ultimately said for I was going to say technical reasons, not technical. It was in violation of the Constitution, so-called relatedness doctrine, all the provisions have to relate to one another. It would have raised roughly $1 billion a year for transportation and $1 billion a year for education. Today, in his education budget, where the governor is acknowledging, as he has in the past, education, particularly poor communities, need a lot more money, Jim Pizer, his Secretary of Education, is saying, we don't need new money. We can do what needs to be done to deal with the inequities in public school funding without any new revenue. Can they?
You know, I think that's what you're going to start to hear. I think the critics will say we do need a lot more money other than what the governor's proposed. And that's why, at least, we can have the discussion now at the beginning of the session. I'm hoping that this education funding, foundation funding, will be solved by the time the session ends. But we still got a lot of time to debate this.
Is this, you know, first of all, we're talking about the payroll tax increase was part of the infamous grand bargain where everybody signed in. But this climate thing, the deeds excise, the real estate industry is unhappy. Some homeowners groups, I assume, are unhappy. Karen Spilka, who we had on the radio yesterday, the Senate President, is pretty tax friendly. I don't mean that. I mean, she's open. But Bob DeLeo has been, the Speaker of the House, has been as anti-new taxes as Governor Baker has been. Will this crack Bob DeLeo's mind open? Or is Baker going to reach a dead end in the House?
And I don't have any inside information.
Nor do I.
But my guess is that the evolving nature of his members is going to change his mind, because that body, I think, while not as far to the left as the Senate, is certainly moving to the left. And I think that he certainly has to be sensitive.
But don't you think those are going to be the people who, I mean, what I hear the most from them are three topics: climate change, which he is funding with new money, education and transportation. Don't you think they're going to be screaming, as Shirley said a minute ago, saying, wait a second, if you can raise new money to address something as important as climate change, you're going to need, despite what Charlie Cipio says, we need new money for transportation, and we surely need new money for schools.
I said we do need money for transportation. I'm just saying that we need new money on the highway side.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, but isn't there going to be, I mean, this almost opens the floodgate, in terms of legislators, it seems to me, who've been tax phobic, because they know what's the point of embracing a tax when you know the governor and the speaker are not going to support it. If one constituency is all of a sudden getting the response they were looking for, isn't that going to put a lot of pressure on the governor and legislative leaders to come up with new tax revenue for other constituencies?
Certainly there'll probably be more pressure. We were talking about a little bit of this earlier. Like, I'm I feel like even though the House has moved towards the left, I still think there might be resistance to raising taxes. I think once the conversation gets going,
even amongst Democrats, who are the vast majority of people.
I think they just because we were talking about, like, look at Airbnb tax. I mean, Airbnb wanted to be taxed themselves, and it took 2 years to figure that out, right? And so I don't know.
But you know what I think is different? In my former life, I used to do tax work, and I went up against probably the most impressive anti-tax advocate, Barbara Anderson, head of Citizens for Limited Taxation. She spoke, and people in Beacon Hill quaked in fear, not all but most. It's a different era. CLT continues to exist, but not what it was. There's another group, I don't even know the name of it, that puts out press releases.
Mass Fiscal Alliance.
Thank you, but has no real influence. I mean, there's no organized tax opposition like there had been for so many years, decades in Massachusetts. That changes the equation too, doesn't it?
Certainly. And so, I think also what will change the equation is the economy. Right now we can discuss raising taxes because our economy is good. But, if there's a slowdown, if there's a recession, that talk is that's not going to be very popular anymore.
So before we leave, even if Baker has broken, and he would say he hasn't, a campaign pledge, you're celebrating the breaking, are you not?
I am. We have a lot of expenses in Massachusetts. So
and how about you?
Yeah, I mean, look, we can't have the sort of the dam break here, but I think there are a few selected things that we really need money for.
As she's the one who got him to do it, that cautious Charlie thing.
There you
I'll
go.
tell you, Charlie, it's great to see you.
Good
Thanks
to
so
see
much,
you.
Shirley, as always.
Good
Really
to see
appreciate
you.
it. Good. Thank you both.